Hello, good day. I am Dr. S.N. Bakshi. I have really developed a lot of interest to know about how Buddhism has come to Ladakh and how Buddhism has spread into Ladakh from different parts of India. So, in this context, I already have given you a wonderful presentation on the second diffusion of Buddhism into Ladakh. Now, Buddhism in Ladakh flourished ever since Guru Rinchen Jangpo, a translator and scholar from Guge region of Tibet, was believed to have founded about 108 monasteries. In my earlier videos, I have given an elaborate account of Tabo, Lahalung, Alchi, Mangur, Sumadachun, and many other contemporary monasteries such as Sani Monastery, Bardhan Monastery, Karsha Monastery, and Dhankar Monastery, and so on. Buddhism has come much before the spread of second diffusion, and Buddhism from Kashmir spread in Ladakh much earlier, from 1st to 2nd century AD, by the emperors of Kushan dynasty and Ladakhi rulers. This pre-Tibetan first diffusion, which is known as first division, resulted in many interesting archaeological important sites in adjoining Ladakh, and there is especially a place called Purig, Esodi, Sod, Suru Valley, and Janskar Valley. The excavated fortification settlements, which means the ruins of the ancient forts and monasteries, and then Buddhist sculptures, rock inscriptions, and pottery pieces that were obtained from different excavations were quite unique of Kashmir style and not found in rest of the Ladakh. So we can see that Ladakh has many regions that I have already spoke about, but these regions are primarily distributed and divided as Chantang region, Lower Ladakh region, which is also called as Sham Valley, then Upper Ladakh region or Zungkhor region, then Nubra Valley, then Purig region, and finally the Janskar region. But this is under the auspice of the sites, especially LadakhArchaeology.com. This particular website has hosted about 10,000 odd artifacts and images of different Ladakhian archaeological findings, and one can easily and freely go through these while going through LadakhArchaeology.com. Categories in which these excavated materials were distinguished are called fortification. Fortification is abundant in entire Ladakh. Then you have petroglyphs and picographs. There means some ancient rock art, which need not necessarily be related to Buddhism alone. Then we have Buddhist carvings, and we find them also elsewhere. Then we have stupa stones. Then we have regular churtans. Again, there is an abundance of that. And there are even other different kinds of relics and artifacts which are available to describe. So now we come back to the point which I was telling you about, the first diffusion of Buddhism. Excavated fortification settlements, Buddhist sculptures, rock inscriptions, and pottery pieces, they were primarily chosen to differentiate between the two different regime of Buddhism, the first diffusion and the second diffusion. My interest now is a little bit more into the first diffusion. Now this is Kashmir style, and this is not found in rest of the Ladakh. Now the region which is actually towards the western side of Ladakh, which is adjoining to the Kashmir area, which is connected through Silk Road to the Central Asia, especially that we know from Batalik region. These are the places where we have evidence for a lot of Kashmir style Buddhist temples and other fortification sites that I'll explain. Now, I am showing you a map. The map of Ladakh represents prominent cities and villages in which Buddhist relics were found in abundance. There are in fact four very important excavation sites where lot many people have worked, especially the archaeologists people have worked, and that can be shortlisted as number one, Dras, that can be called as mouth of Ladakh. Now this represents the Purik region. Purik is that area which is more towards the western side of Ladakh. So that's where we would expect a lot of influence of Kashmiri pattern of Buddhism. Second one is Fikar region, which is very close to Kargil, present-day Kargil. Now that's part of SOD or Sword Valley, and the Sword Valley is connected to Central Asia through Batalik region. And this used to be one of the Silk Road connecting Kashmir to the Central Asia and the Eastern Asia. The third part that I would talk about is Tangol region. Now Tangol represents the Suru Valley. Suru Valley has many connecting routes from Kashmir, and they are mountain passes. And the Suru Valley that has Tangol region, and down south then you have fourth region that is called Janskar region, and Janskar Valley itself is quite vast, and Janskar Valley has a lot of influence from the first diffusion. So we are taking therefore four different regions that I have tried to explain to you in this particular map. The other cities and villages are of archaeological importance. Many ancient relics have been discovered giving evidence of Buddhist practices prevailing from Kushan and post-Kushan period. Significantly, extensive influence of Kashmir and contemporary Ladakhi rulers can be found in this particular part, the four regions that I have explained of Ladakh. They patronized a prominent non-Tibetan proliferation of Buddhism that was mixed with local Bon and Chos religious practices. Now Bon Chos religious practices was originally different from Buddhist practices. Now later, consequently, evidence gathered that the Bon Chos, many places, this particular religious practice was taken over by Buddhist practices arising from Kashmir. So let's start one by one. In Tangol, the first site that I have talked about, the fortification pattern, like there's the main excavation sites will be fortification, which means the ruins of either the forts or monasteries, and those sites are still identifiable. So the fortification pattern depicts rows of very small, that is about 2 meter by 2 meter rooms, and in fact some of them were even 1.5 meter size, and they are around the courtyard. So there is a courtyard in middle and in the center, and these rows of these rooms surrounded that. This is how the fortification pattern was seen. Now these buildings are flat series of large number of enclosed rooms, hardly erected above the ground floor. Such huge colonization does not indicate the structure is made of large fort. Usually forts are not built that way, and forts will have a different architecture altogether. So these are not forts, but they were settlements, or perhaps they were fortification structures that yet to be described. Now there was a solid platform at one of the ends of this series of rooms, and this this particular platform can be in both ends or maybe one end. And this particular platform was quite hard, and it was perhaps the ones which were housing the chorten or the stupa, the religious point. Now stupas were used as sort of object of worshipping, and you don't have a typical monastery then. Such complex arrangements are atop a hill. Usually they were found in the hilltops or in the slopes of the hills. Hardly human settlement is possible in these kind of small rooms, so these are not colonization. So the structures were intended to religious purposes. Now they were not made for living or for wars even. They were made for religious purpose. Perhaps they were the early monastery ruins. Now these monasteries were atypical There were something like Bauddha Vihar that we see in Kashmir. So obviously it is of the same style, where these rooms were used as a part of monastery, and maybe to some extent a place where monks they live. Next is our Dras Khar. Now Dras has many forts, so one can believe that these fortification or the ruined structures are basically forts. So Dras has displayed some design and used for spiritual region and additionally for defense purpose. So the picture in front of you is of Railemo Khar and Biru Khar. These two excavation sites are on top of the two hills, and there is a small stream which is passing through. Now if you look into Railemo Khar or Lomochen Khar or Kharuli Khar or Shimsa Kharbu Khar, now these are different ruins that are present in and around Dras area. Then you will find the same kind of room arrangements in a series, sometimes of two series or two lines, or sometimes more than two lines. And as you will see in case of Tangol, the same pattern of rooms are seen here. In some places you have the platform for the stupa, and in the other places it is not present. So it basically, all of them can be considered for monastic purpose. And obviously in Simsa there is little bit of chance that may be a complete fort, but rest of them apparently are monastic. They also had fortification remains, and these objects were either used for spiritual purpose, as I already have indicated in case of Tangol, and in addition to that they were also used for defense purpose, because Dras was in the Silk Route, so it was always exposed to outside forces. Many rulers from Kashmir and Dras overlapped this region. So they were partially the Kashmiri rulers and partially the rulers from Ladakh. They overlapped this region and they had good relation. They divided the area mutually. And hence the cultural mix of architecture was apparent. Interestingly, both Kushan era shreds of red ceramic pottery. Now, Kushan era ceramic was very famous. It is a baked ceramic pottery, and they are actually red in color. And they have some designs which are very typical of Kushan era. So they are found here, and they were recovered indicating Buddhist monasteries of some different designs were established during 2nd century onwards. Now these were some kind of Buddhist monasteries primarily, even in Dras, and they had somewhat different design from what you see in Tangol, yet they were basically coming out of post-Kushan era. Carbon dating was carried out in these two regions, and that corroborated to these assumptions that they were pre-Tibetan Buddhist settlements. And perhaps these Buddhist settlements either were the migratory people from Kashmir, or they were the locals who have adopted the Buddhism as their primary religion. Now, apart from that, Suru Valley and Dras region were certainly the part so-called first division of Buddhism, that is for sure, because these are the places where carbon dating has been carried out, and the Buddhist practices were carried out in Ladakh by traders and monks of Silk Road. So that's very sure shot, because otherwise they were not approachable from other directions or other places. So that's how the people who were traders, they were actually also carried out religious practices here. Now beyond this region, Buddhism migrated and it is diverted into two routes. Now beyond the place called Purik, it is diverted in two routes, particularly in Purik. The northward through north side, it is through Batalik, following Indus River to Central Asia, and southward towards Zanskar region. Now there is a place called Fikar, which is very close to Kargil. Now Fikar has many forts, and Fikar fortification is the third location representing the north part of the Purik region. The pattern of room arrangements is also somewhat similar. Here you see, instead of very long series, we have 3 to 4 room complexes were seen, and they were just scattered. They were scatteredly placed. So there was nothing like a very clear-cut rows pattern here, and they were scattered in a vast enclosure that was covered by a wall. A monastic ruin was established, but huge enclosure indicates the possibility of full-fledged fort rather than a monastic site. But there may be many monastic sites within the periphery of the particular fort that can be deduced from the ruins that we see here. Now when we go towards the south, there is a Sani Talungste, the place that was there. It's very close to Sani Monastery, in which the Konika stupa is found and present. People worship it. So Sani Taglungste, that this is the place which is slightly away, about 2.5 kilometers from Sani, and this is a place where exactly same kind of room arrangements are seen, and it was witnessed upon excavation. Rooms were in the order of about 200 or more in one row, in one complex. So this is a huge kind of fortification that we see, and that means there were about these many number of people were gathering in this particular place. But it was not a fort. Presumably the stupa that we see in the Sani monastery was built by Kushan emperors. Especially we can think of Panika stupa that was by Kushan emperors, and later it was shifted to Sani monastery once that monastery was built. The ruins are still present, commemorating the first diffusion in Janskar region as well. So since Sani is down south into the Janskar, so therefore it is very apparent that the entire area was converted into Buddhism through the first diffusion. So I tried to compare randomly chosen excavation sites different from Purik region and the Suru Valley region and also Batalik region. And these are sites where Basko, which has many forts, Lingshed, and finally Stok. So Stok also has, these are all from Leh area, so they should be called as the upper Ladakh or lower Ladakh. So from this area, in fact, Lingshed is somewhat close in the boundary of Janskar region itself. Now these fortified structures that were gathered from Basgo, Lingshed or Stok, they were typically fort-like buildings, and they were built by royalty. That these kind of fort we see elsewhere also. The robust structures were tall. They were not as short as we have seen so far in these 4 sites. They were multi-storied with perfectly angled walls. So they were highly structured buildings. They were not randomly made. All along the path we could see Buddhist carvings, stone inscriptions, stupa stones that highlight how religious fervor prevailed during post-Kushan period, much before the emergence of Tibetan Buddhism or their second diffusion. The inscriptions along Buddha carvings in Suru and Dras are generally Kashmiri Sharda script. That is one of the ancient scripts, somewhat similar to Hindi. Whereas in rest of the places, apart from that, we see the Tibetan script is prevailing as inscription on stones and Buddha carvings. So in nutshell, I described about some archaeological evidence of rich Buddhism culture in Western Ladakh adjoining Kashmir. The fortification structure, Buddhist carvings and scriptures are also found in rest of the Ladakh, but they are different from what I have shown you in the Purik region and does not follow or adhere to the described pattern that I have shown elsewhere in my second Buddhism video. So thank you very much. I really appreciate.